Welcome to Chandwell. My name's Michael, and as well as building this N-scale model of a run-down West Yorkshire town, over the next 11 months I'm also building a model of Bradford Cathedral. I've finished the first of the cathedral's 23 parts, the Nave, and I'm really pleased with how well it's coming on. I've been talking about the cathedral for months, and it's really nice to finally see it taking shape. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I progressed from serial packet mock-up to solid representation of the centre part of the cathedral, the nave. After so much thought, discussion, drawing, head-scratching and mock-ups, it was really exciting to see the first part of the model come out of the printer. This will be one of the 3 layers that will make up the south wall. Whilst I'm waiting for the others to come out, let's hear from Bradford Cathedral's Director of Education and Visitors, Maggie Myers, who told me why the nave is called Nave.
So here we are in the nave of the cathedral, and there are some different theories as to why this is called the nave, but the most common one is the word nave comes from the Latin word navis, meaning ship. And if you look at the ceiling of a church or a cathedral, it looks like an upturned boat. So that's the most common theory as to why it's called a nave. There are other theories as well about the idea of it, the word ship, meaning nave, meaning ship, being to do with stories from the Bible, Noah's Ark, Jesus on the boat, it being used as a symbol. But, you know, perhaps the nicest one is the idea that the roof looks like an upturned boat.
Each wall is made from 3 layers of 0.5mm card. With the outline printed onto sticky label, I stick the label to a sheet of card. Roughly cutting away the waste before sticking makes it possible to easily use the off-cut card for smaller components later. With them all stuck, it's time to cut. I drew a rectangle around the actual wall. This was so I could glue them together before making the final cut around the actual shape. This ensures that I get nice clean cuts and no wobbles where the layer edges are not quite perfect. I use my big knife to cut through the long edges, using multiple light strokes rather than one big one, which would risk tearing the card, or my fingers. I use the scalpel to cut out the window apertures. The ruler helps me get straight lines where needed, and I do the arched tops freehand. First one side, and then the other. This means that I only move the knife in a comfortable direction, and it avoids any risks involving awkward hand placement. I take my time and use multiple strokes. Eventually, the window pops out. You may remember from the window mock-up video that each layer of card has the window apertures cut at a slightly different size. This allows them to look recessed into the thick walls in a realistic manner. The 3 sheets just go on top of each other like this. I use my thinner PVA glue and I ensure a nice even covering. And then I just drop the second layer on top. And repeat. A stack of books on top keeps everything from warping as the glue dries. I print the wall texture onto 110 GSM matte photo paper using the coursed ashlar texture from Scale Scenes. Whilst I'm cutting, it's clear that the south wall has crenelations along the top, whereas the north one does not. I asked Maggie why this was.
In 1833, the south side was rebuilt. You can see this behind me here. They also added the south porch. The bit sticking out over there that you can see behind me, that's the transept, and that wasn't added until the late 1890s.
I glued the north side texture to the component I cut earlier. I paste it right across the top of the window apertures, and then, with the glue dry, I cut the final shape using gentle strokes of the knife. This gives a lovely clean edge to the 3 layers of card and 1 of paper. This bit sticking up is the base of the tower buttress, which integrates with the west side of the nave. I cut across the texture that covers the windows, and then gently fold the texture around the beveled edges caused by the different sized holes in each layer. I use PVA glue and gentle angled pressure from my scribe tool to get the texture tightly fitted into place. By gently rolling the tool in an arc along the arch, I can get the stonework to look beautifully curved and smooth. Not bad, eh? The window tracery is made from 3 layers of thin card. That's 9 windows each side, 3 layers of card. That's 54 pieces of window tracery I had to cut out for the nave alone. I did it carefully over a few sessions to prevent going cross-eyed. I got there in the end. I was incredibly careful with the scalpel, and this paid off as this piece of card here is just 1/4 of a millimetre wide. Place a Lego man and a pound coin on top, and it's really clear just how small these components are. With them all done, they go on top of each other like this using PVA to give a subtle bevel to the stonework. Once painted a stone colour, I was happy with the effect. I used a fine brush to remove any white paper edges that were showing. PVA glue was added to the edges and the wall was placed on top. I drew the glazing in Inkscape. I used colours from a photo of the real cathedral and filled in each of the individual panes of glass a different and random shade. By making each individual pane a slightly different shade, it makes the windows have a lovely imperfect look to the glazing. And I had to make sure that each one was completely different to the one beside it, because the human eye is really quick at picking up repetitive patterns, and I think if I'd just cut and pasted it all the way along, it would have really ruined the overall effect. These eventually just glued on top of the tracery like this. Not bad. Onto the south side. I carefully cut around the crenelations and then pasted this on top of the card wall. You can see that I didn't actually cut the crenelations into the card itself. This is because I thought if I'm making it from 3 layers, I won't be able to get it exactly right and the walls around the crenelations would be a little bit wobbly. I also thought it might be a little bit too much to try and cut these really small crenelations out of 1.5–2mm worth of card. So I just put them on the paper, put the card on top, and then glued individual crenelations along the paper as I went. I was left with the paper crenelations poking over the wall like this. I drew a grid of individual crenelations and stuck it to 3 layers of card, and then, once cut, these went onto the paper individually. Once dry, I trimmed them all off. At this point in the build, I noticed that I'd left something resting on the texture while the glue was still wet. When this happens, the glue seems to react with the magenta ink in the texture, and I was left with a few reddish blotches on the walls. I decided I couldn't live with it. It went in the bin. While I catch up and get back to where I was, here's Maggie sharing a little bit about the cathedral's nave angels.
The nave angels that you can see behind and above me, they were put up here as part of the 1860s restoration of the building. They were coloured, gilded in the 1960s, and that was done to balance with the new East End extension to spruce up the nave a little bit and give it a bit of colour and a bit of balance. The shields that you can also see up there, they were put up in 1937 and they contain the arms of the diocese and the former diocese and also the arms of neighbouring towns.
The north side of the nave has a row of dentils that supports the guttering. I cut a comb shape from 1mm card and put a dab of glue at each prong. This was then stuck along the top of the wall. Because it was just one piece of card, I was able to get it fixed to the wall in a straight line with the exact spacing that I needed. Once dry, I could just trim it along here and have the dentils all correct. Before I add more detail, let's hear from Maggie about some of the alterations that have been made to these walls over the years.
So behind me, in the north wall, if you look really closely, you can see the stones are different at the top. They're more even. And that's because the building in the late 1700s, galleries were put in. So there was a gallery above where I'm standing, the north side, a gallery on the east side, a gallery right across the back, and also later on, more kind of oddly, a gallery across the front. And another thing they did was they covered up that beautiful ceiling, they whitewashed the walls, the pulpit was halfway down. It was really, really different than it is today. And the reason that we've got that difference in the wall there is because the ceiling here on the aisle wasn't like it is now. So we had the gallery floor put in and then obviously another ceiling above that. So it looked completely different from how it looks now. And in the 1860s, they started taking down the galleries and started restoring the church to its former glory. And at the end of that restoration work in the 1890s, that's when they put the 2 side bits on, the 2 transepts here. They were not on the original building.
It's really fascinating how this building has changed over time. The south side has a row of dentils and a stone gutter below the crenelations, and I used a similar technique for this as before. I cut a comb line strip from 1mm card, and another strip of card just 1mm wide, and that will go along the dentils like this. With the dentil comb held straight between 2 rulers, I used a third ruler to add a straight line of glue. and into that I could place the strip of card and nudge it straight. That's about right. I added glue to the wall and then I dropped the painted part into it and got it straight. Wonderful. It's almost time to glue them together into the shape of the nave. Before that though, Maggie wanted to show an interesting feature of the nave down in the southwest corner.
So I'm here on the office gallery and I'm still inside the building obviously, but what I'm standing next to is the old nave wall. So it's the nave before the 1950s and 60s extension work. So if you look up to this wall up here, you can see the line there, the diagonal line, which is the end of this corner of the nave. And obviously there to the right is the 1950s extension work there. So the difference in the stone that you can see. And you can see here up to my right, just here, 2 stone heads on the wall that have been here since the late 1300s, the 1400s. They're really well preserved. Obviously they've been inside for the last 60 years or so, but even before that it seems like this southwest corner was less exposed to the extremes of weather than the west end, where all the stone heads are really, really worn away. And these 2 are beautiful examples. We don't know who they are. Maybe it's King Henry VI, who was the king at the time of the building of this structure. Maybe the master stonemason, maybe a benefactor. We don't know who these people are, but we love a mystery here at the cathedral, so there they are, and there they'll stay.
With the walls both complete, I cut floor and gable supports from 1mm card, and using a scale model scenery right angle jig, I carefully assembled the pieces along the walls. I added supports at the bottom for strength, and then added floor pieces to keep the whole thing square and true. Oh no! When I drew it, I paid no attention to where the windows were, and the supports will foul them here. Ah well, laugh and carry on. I cut out a gap and quietly ignored it. I used a couple of engineer's squares to hold everything straight as the glue set. Eagle-eyed viewers will spot another mistake here, which really did cause trouble later on. So with the north wall in place, the glue all dry and the nave taking shape, it was time to put the south wall on. And yes, you guessed, I'd forgotten to cut slots for the windows on this side. Oops, I needed to hack at it with the knives to make them without damaging anything else. With that out the way, I could use PVA glue and carefully drop the wall into place. Clamps held everything whilst the glue went off. The crenelations have subtle stonework and stepped tops. I used tiny slices of thin card to represent the stonework. These dropped onto the PVA glue using tweezers. I stacked 4 strips of card on top of each other, with each layer getting a bit narrower. This created a lovely stepped topper which I cut into bits and dropped into place on the crenelations. I made a simple gutter by folding some texture around some 0.5mm card, and this dropped into place on the north wall. I added texture to the columns at the end which will become part of the tower buttresses. By lining up the texture carefully, I've managed to get a nice crisp edge. Stone-coloured paint takes away the whiteness of the card. With the crenelations stonework painted, the roof drops on top. The beautiful stone roof at the cathedral features much larger tiles down at the front and less deep ones towards the top. I counted 5 different depths. I am incredibly grateful to John Whiffen at scalescenes.com who made me a custom texture just right for Bradford Cathedral. The colour is just right and the size of the tiles is perfect as well. Big down the bottom, small at the top. John, this has really made this model so much better than it otherwise would have been, so thank you very, very much for that. I am incredibly grateful. The texture is designed to be cut into strips and slightly overlapped to give a 3D feel to the roof. Once used and tiled, the roof dropped onto the model with a padding piece to get it raised slightly above the gutter, and then the other side went on too. I used a small strip of card to raise the ridge to the correct height, and then folded a section of ridge tile texture and glued it along the top. I varnished the whole model with Perma Protect varnish. With the varnish still wet, I dabbed on watery watercolour paint into the varnish and spread it around with a brush before dabbing it away again with toilet paper. This leads to a lovely subtle weathering which you can build up in layers. I used green on the north side to represent the moss that covers the real roof in Bradford. So my nave is about done. You'll notice that I've made it quite tall, and that's because I've built in an extra 5cm at the bottom to represent the ground, and then when the model's finished I can then model the undulating ground around it, and I think that'll work really well. I have made a slight mistake though. I've made the crenelations a little bit too tall. I've been looking at the drawings for months and never spotted it until just now actually, so I'm a little bit annoyed about that. But I think it looks okay and I'm not sure anyone would really notice. I do need to decide whether I make the same mistake on all the other crenelations that are going to come around this side, or whether I try to correct them. I think it'd look a bit odd if they're all a little bit different, so I'll probably stick with that as it is. It's one of those things, and I'm bound to make many more mistakes as this model evolves. Despite my best efforts, the two tower buttresses are slightly out of alignment. One is a millimetre higher than the other. I think that's because the north wall is about half a millimetre too high up the supports, and the south half a millimetre too low. I think that this should be fixable once I start the tower. I think with a model like this, made up of 23 individual pieces over a large area, it's going to be a real challenge to keep everything level and square and true. But I'll do my best, and I think I'll be able to make sure that it all works out in the end. But enough of that. I'm really pleased with how this is coming along, and I'm starting now to be able to see what the overall model is going to be like. I'm moving on to the tower next, and hopefully that will really start to show what this model is going to be all about. If you missed my talk that I gave in the cathedral last month entitled Smaller Scale, Wider Perspective, then it was recorded and you can watch that recording here. I really enjoyed giving that talk in the beautiful cathedral, and I hope you might enjoy listening to it as well. So watch out for that video in a few weeks. But until then, thank you for watching this one, take care, and I'll see you next time.